as I've already told you. Um, this is a really uncomfortable place, but I guess I'll continue with part 3. And if it ever seems that I'm bouncing all over the place, it's so much. And I don't have it written down. I just know it because it's something I've lived, it's things I've learned, and hopefully by me recording it, I will be able to write it down in a much more fluent way. So I ended with my great-grandfather, and his name was Wilson Earl, or Earl Wilson, I can't ever remember. And he had my grandfather, my big daddy, which was Wilson Earl, or Earl Wilson Jr. And my big daddy lived in Jackson, Tennessee, and he was a twin. He had a twin, my Aunt Ann, and they were fraternal twins. And my great-grandfather worked for the railroad station. Well, my grandfather, my big daddy, he was an exceptional athlete, and he was such a kind man. My big daddy, if anyone knows my big daddy, they know what a wonderful man he is. But he was an exceptional athlete. He threw the javelin and held the school record. I learned as a child, I thought it was a state record for years. But with that, he also had the capability in playing for football, and he had the opportunity to play college football to get scholarships. He had, I think, UT Knoxville, University of Louisiana, and I think it was Ole Miss who looked at him. And his uncle is who scouted for him. But my great-grandfather thought him going to college was worthless, and it wasn't going to be something that he would use. And so my great-grandfather forced my grandfather to quit high school and to this is what I was told, to quit high school and to go and work for the railroad. And then and he had been dating my grandmother for a long time, and so he did, and he ended up I think, at what I understand, working for the railroad for a short time, and then the World War II began, and he married my grandmother, who was a year behind him, and he went to, I guess, training, and then once they married, she finished and graduated high school, and he went and trained in the military, and then he went to Missouri, and my grandmother followed him to Missouri, and then she worked for a jeweler in St. Louis, from what I understand, or near St. Louis, and then that's where they started life. And so from there, they moved a few places. They moved to Kentucky, and then they moved, I think, to Dyersburg. My dad was born in Dyersburg and held the record for being the shortest baby born in Dyersburg, which is kind of ironic because he's such a tall man. And so, but they moved from Jackson, Tennessee to those places, and they were married for 72 beautiful years. And so that's the piece of that. And so my parents, then eventually they moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and my parents grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and they met through church, and they knew each other through church, and they married. And then here I am. So I was born on July 27th, and I've moved quite a many times in my life, quite a many schools, many friends, and I have nothing to complain about it. Hopefully it made me a well-rounded person. But in those movings, I've been to a few things, and so I guess we will pick up when I moved to Lexington, Tennessee. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and my parents had lived in Halls and then moved to Dyersburg, Tennessee. And then my dad got a job with OMC, which was a boating motor company. And we moved to Lexington, Tennessee when I was 5 years old. At that time, we rented a home, and that's just what we did while my parents were building a house off of Beach Lake at 103 Crestwood Lane, Lexington, Tennessee. And so I lived there. That's where I had my very first little boyfriend, and his name was Kurt Holmes. And I went to kindergarten there, and I went to, that's where I started going to a Baptist church in Lexington, Tennessee. And I can remember it. My parents have always been Christians. As long as I've known, I've always been involved in the church. But my parents, because it was a different denomination from Cumberland Presbyterian and it went to Baptist, my parents had to be rebaptized. And I remember being in the balcony, and I remember my mother going into the water, and I remember hearing God ask me to join his family, and I knew it. And that night, when I went home to 103 Crestwood Lane, I asked my mom when I could be baptized, and she told me I needed to wait, that it wasn't time. But I kept asking, and I kept asking, because I knew that was exactly what I wanted. And she was so unsure about it, which I think any parent would be at a child who's 5, maybe almost 6. She went and asked Brother Schaff, our minister in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and Brother Schaff said, when a child knows, they know. And so my mom, she wanted me to be baptized by Brother Schaff. And I always called him Granddaddy because he was my friends Holly and Leah Walker. Now they're married, so they have different names. Granddaddy. And but she wanted me to be baptized by him. But I can remember that day and that moment when my mom went to be baptized in the Baptist church, and I remember God asking me to be his and to come into his family. So we go from Wilson, my great-grandfather in World War I with Woodrow Wilson with the Bryce Report, to my grandfather, my big daddy, Wilson Earl, from Jackson, Tennessee, who was an amazing athlete, who had a love story with my buddy, Birdie Tyree Wade, and their 72-year plus marriage, where he heard God say that he was supposed to marry her, to me moving, or me being born, and my parents meeting and me being born, and to me eventually moving to 103 Crestwood Lane in Lexington, Tennessee, and having my first little boyfriend, Kurt Holmes, to Jesus asking me to join his family. So here we go.